Today I'll be doing a tutorial on how to read a burndown chart. I'll also be showing you how as Scrum Master you can help your team improve their productivity using this chart. Also, if you're an intending Scrum Master interviewing for Scrum Master roles, you may be asked at an interview to give your observations on a burndown chart and talk about what you will do differently. So make sure you watch this video to the end. Thank you to everyone who subscribed and watched my intro video. If you're yet to see that video, please do so you'll learn more about what this channel is about. My name is Abby. I'm a Scrum Master, Agile Project Manager, and Coach. So what is a burndown chart? This is a very important Scrum metric that shows at a glance the status of the sprint at every point in time. And so the team can see their progress and determine whether or not they will meet their sprint goal or commitment by the end of the sprint. It also helps them see potential issues before they occur, and so they can take corrective action to help them successfully deliver their commitment for the sprint. A burn-down chart, however, is not a status report for stakeholders. It is also not used to micromanage the team. It is used by the team only and for the team to optimize the work that they're doing. So now let's go into the tutorial and you'll learn how to read and interpret a burn down chart. And hopefully going forward, you start to take a look at your team's burn down and see things a bit differently. My training sessions team project. Now the burn down chart for your team may look different from what I have here. But with every burn down chart that you see, a few things are common to all of them. The first thing that you see is story point axis, which is on the vertical axis. And you'll find this if your team is estimating in story points. The next thing you will see is a timeline axis, which is the horizontal axis here. This shows the timeline for the sprint. And so on this axis, you'll find the date for each day of the sprint and also different times. The next thing that you'll see is the guideline. So Jira calls this the ideal burn rate, the guideline. And this line is a gray line that slants from top to bottom, all the way from top to bottom across the burn down chart. Now, this guideline shows the ideal rate at which the team should burn down work. And by burn down work, I mean make progress and close work items in the sprint backlog. Now, this ideal line, this guideline is automatically generated by Jira when you start the sprint to act as a guide for how the sprint should progress ideally if the team is to meet their sprint commitment. If you open your burn down chart and you do not see this guideline, then it could mean that you started your sprint in Jira before adding work items to the sprint backlog. Now, the next thing you're going to see is this red line. So Jira calls this line remaining work, which is number of story points left to complete in the sprint. So this red line here showing remaining work is the actual rate at which your team is burning down work. Remember we said the guideline is the ideal line? Well, the red line is the actual rate at which they are burning down work. And so on this line, you will see work in progress indicated by horizontal movement along this line. So this is work in progress right here. This short horizontal line is also work in progress. This short horizontal line is work in progress as well. This is work in progress, and this is work in progress. On this line, you will also see work done or work completed. So work done is indicated by a downward movement along the remaining work line, along the red line. So this downward movement represents work done or work completed. So you have work completed here. You also have work completed here. You have work completed here and work completed here. Lastly, you will see scope change also along this red line. Scope change means that additional work has been added to the sprint from the product backlog, or a sprint backlog item that was closed in the sprint has been reopened and then added back into the sprint. So scope change is indicated by an upward movement along the red line. So anytime you see an upward movement along the red line, you have scope change. And so for this chart, scope change happened once. So irrespective of what your burn down chart looks like, you will see the story point axis along the vertical axis. You will see the timeline axis, which is horizontal. You will see your guideline, which represents the ideal rate at which your team should make progress throughout the sprint. You will find a red line, which is the remaining work line, which is the actual progress that they are making. And along the red line, you will find work in progress, which is the horizontal lines along the red line. You will see work done or work completed, which is a downward movement along the horizontal line. And then you will also see scope change, which is an upward movement along the horizontal line. Now, why is it important for you as Scrum Master to be able to interpret this chart? It helps you determine if your team will meet their sprint commitment for the sprint, and if not, you can take preventive actions to correct this before the sprint ends. So now let's take a closer look at what's happening in this burndown chart. So for this team, they started their sprint with 12 story points. And so if you move along this the vertical line, which is the story point line, you'll find 12 story points here. So on the first day of the sprint, they started with 12 story points and 4 sprint backlog items, which is the issue count. And then when they started the sprint, some progress was made, which is indicated by this short horizontal line here. And then they completed some work items. So you see the downward movement, they completed some work. And the number of story points for the items completed is 3 points. So you have -3 in there because from 12 points, there was a reduction by 3. And so they completed a 3-point item, or in your case, it could be a combination of sprint backlog items totaling 3 points. And then they further completed more work, which is indicated by the downward movement, and they completed 5 points. So there was a further reduction by 5 points from 12. And then some progress was made here. And when they got to this point, there was scope change. So some work was added to the sprint, totaling 3 points, and which is why you have +3 in there. So that could be a combination of backlog items totaling 3, or just one item, which is 3 points. And you will confirm this when you look in the Jira task board. Now, after work was added to the sprint, they made some progress indicated by this short horizontal line here. And then they further burned down some work totaling 2 points. So their total number of points here reduced by 2, and that's why you have -2. And then they made some progress here as well, which is the horizontal line, and then burned down more work, which is indicated here. And in burning down work, they reduced their total number of story points by 3, which is why you have -3 in there. They then made some more progress here, and then burned down more work. And so the number of story points now reduced by 2. And then made more progress until the sprint ended. So by the time they finished their sprint, they completed all their sprint commitment for that sprint. And so the red line meets the guideline here because the sprint commitment has been completed and the sprint has ended. Now, there is no ideal burn down chart. However, every burn down chart has this guideline which acts as a guide for how the team or for how the sprint should ideally progress if the team is to meet their sprint commitment. So the further now, if you observe from the chart that work has been in progress for an unusual period of time, or work is not being completed at a consistent pace, That could indicate that there's a blocker, and you should then ask questions from your team members to determine what the issue might be. For instance, if you're more than halfway through the sprint and you know that at that point work should have been completed, but you're only seeing work in progress, that could indicate that there's a blocker and someone needs help. So rather than wait for your team to report to you that there's a blocker, you will see that right on the chart, and you can take corrective action. Now, someone might say that's why we have the daily scrum to talk about blockers. Well, that is true, but the burn down chart is a true representation of the status of the sprint, and it helps you to be proactive rather than reactive. Also, remember that some team members will be more outspoken than others, so you can't always wait for your team to report issues to you. You should always be a step ahead. Secondly, if on the chart you observe more scope change than work done, there's a chance your team will not meet their commitment, because scope change is a deviation from the guideline as we saw in the tutorial. Now, what should be your next line of action? Help your team effectively balance change with planned work so as to get everyone on track, back on track quickly. Now, let me say here that as much as we should be open to change happening during the sprint, we need to properly manage that process such that change does not impact the work that the team has committed to deliver. In a separate video, I'll talk more about how to effectively manage change in a sprint. Now, lastly, if your team is then burning down work at a steady pace by moving closer to the guideline and completing sprint backlog items, then you will also see that from the chart, and you can continue to support the team, encourage the team, and celebrate the team. Now, everything I've mentioned so far is to help you take preventive measures to help your team meet their sprint commitment. But if for whatever reason you were not able to do this during the sprint, or some things slipped off your radar, all hope is not lost. You can use your burn down chart as a point of discussion in your retrospective, and then bring your observations to the team. And hopefully from there, you all can agree on actions for future sprints. Remember that inspection, adaptation, and transparency should continuously happen throughout the sprint. So there you have it. You can now see how the burn down chart can help you optimize your team's productivity. I hope that going forward, you start to look at your team's burn down a bit differently and start to take the right actions. This brings me to the end of my video for today. I hope you've learned something. If you have, please leave a comment. If you have any questions or any related topics you want me to talk about, also leave a comment. I just might do that in my next video. And as always, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know when my next video pops up. And I'll see you next time.